I got my son's divorce from his wife because I knew her secret, which he could not even imagine. Stay with me until the very end to find out how the story ends. I look forward to your comments and thoughts on the story. From the very beginning, I knew something was off. Maybe it was the way she smiled, too wide, too rehearsed, or the way she held my son's hand in public, always just long enough to be noticed. To everyone else, she was sweet, polite, even charming. But to me, she was a stranger playing a part far too well. My son David fell fast. That's how he's always been. A good heart, an open heart, too open. He brought her home after only 3 weeks of dating, convinced she was the one. I kept my doubts tucked behind polite nods and lukewarm coffee. I listened as she talked about her job in marketing, her love of yoga, her plans to settle down soon and start a family. All the right words. Too right. She didn't fool me. Not for a second. But I said nothing. I had promised myself long ago not to interfere in my son's life. After all, I had raised him to think for himself. I had raised him to trust, but trust can be dangerous in the wrong hands. They married 6 months later in a vineyard outside Santa Barbara, the kind of wedding you see in magazines. Blush roses, fairy lights, a string quartet. I sat in the front row in a pale blue dress I didn't like, smiling through every photo, clapping at every toast. I even gave a speech. I talked about love, commitment, and new beginnings. I never said a word about the storm I felt brewing in my chest. Years passed. From the outside, they looked perfect. David got promoted. She started her own small business. They bought a house. They posted holiday photos on Instagram, smiling at the beach, sipping wine in Napa, carving pumpkins in October. But photos lie. I knew better. I never liked her friends. Never liked how they whispered when I walked into a room. Never liked how she treated me when David wasn't around. Just cold enough to freeze the edges of the air, but warm enough to keep up appearances. She underestimated me. Most people do, but I knew. I had known for a long time. And one day I saw something. Something that changed everything. Something that made my hands tremble and my heart pound. That was the day I made my decision. She would not stay married to my son. It came on a Thursday. A plain white envelope, tucked between grocery store flyers and a gardening catalog. No return address, just my name in careful handwriting I didn't recognize. I might have tossed it aside if not for the feeling, deep, sudden cold, a knowing like a whisper in my chest. I opened it at the kitchen table, beside a half-eaten apple and a lukewarm cup of tea. The moment I pulled out the photo, my breath caught. I didn't understand at first. It was blurry, taken from a distance. But the woman, her posture, her coat, even the way she tilted her head, it was her. And the man beside her was not my son. They were holding hands. At first I told myself I must be mistaken. Maybe it was old. Maybe it wasn't even her. But deep down, I knew. A mother knows. And I had always been watching, quietly, from a distance. The photo was dated, 2 weeks ago. No note, no explanation. Just that one image. But it was enough to rip open every doubt I had ever buried. I stared at it for what felt like hours, turning it over again and again, looking for answers in a piece of paper that offered none. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling fan spin above me, each blade slicing through the quiet like a clock ticking down. I thought about David, about how happy he looked when he talked about her, how he still believed in her goodness, how he had once told me, "Mom, she sees the best in people." I had smiled when he said it. I had wanted so badly to believe he was right, but love can blind even the brightest minds. I didn't tell anyone about the envelope. Not yet. I kept it hidden in my jewelry box, beneath the pearls I never wear. I told myself I needed more. Proof, reason, timing. Still, something shifted inside me that day. A line had been crossed, and no amount of pretending could uncross it. This wasn't just dislike anymore. This wasn't a mother's intuition or a quiet judgment. This was betrayal. Quiet, deliberate, cowardly betrayal. And I couldn't let it go. Not when it came to my son. Not when he trusted her more than anyone else in the world. Not when I knew the truth, and she didn't yet know that I knew. I started watching her more closely, not just the usual glances across the dinner table or the polite conversations we exchanged at family gatherings. I began to study her, how she moved, what she said, what she didn't say. And the more I looked, the more I saw. Lies have a way of curling around the edges of a person, like smoke. You might not notice it at first, but it lingers. Her laugh was too sharp, her words rehearsed. She was always performing, and David, sweet, gentle David, was her most devoted audience. I tried to convince myself that I was wrong, that the photo had to be a mistake. But deep inside, I felt something shifting, something breaking. I started asking small questions, innocent on the surface. How was her business doing? Had she seen any of her old college friends lately? She always answered quickly, too quickly, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. David, of course, noticed none of it. He thought they were happy. He told me, just a few days after the envelope arrived, that he was thinking about starting a family. "I think she's ready now," he said, eyes glowing. "She even brought home baby name books." I felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. He had no idea. She was planning a life with him, all while holding someone else's hand in the shadows. The cruelty of it made my blood boil. And yet, I stayed silent. I nodded. I smiled. I said all the right things. Because this time, I couldn't act on instinct alone. I needed more. So I began to dig. I knew better than to confront her outright. That would only drive her deeper into secrecy. No, I had to be quiet, methodical, just like she had been. I started looking through public records, old social media posts, even her LinkedIn profile. It all seemed so perfect, so polished, too polished. And then, one night, I found something. A single message buried in an old blog comment. It was vague, but it mentioned her by name, and it sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just infidelity. It was bigger than that, much bigger. And I realized the truth I suspected might only be the surface. What lay beneath could destroy everything. It was a single comment on an old blog post, barely 2 lines, posted over 5 years ago, and buried deep in a forgotten corner of the internet. But it mentioned her name, not just her first name, but her full name, the one she never used anymore, the one I only saw once, on the marriage license David asked me to sign as a witness. The post was about financial scams, and the comment read, "Beware of LC, she knows how to disappear. I lost everything." I stared at the screen for a long time, my hand frozen over the mouse. It felt like standing at the edge of something deep and dark, a place you know you shouldn't go, but can't resist. I clicked the user profile. Dead end. No posts, no other comments. Just that one warning, floating in the void like a match struck in a storm. I copied the screenshot and saved it to my phone. My hands were trembling, but my mind had never felt sharper. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. There was something there. I didn't sleep that night again. The next morning, I asked David to meet me for breakfast, just the two of us like we used to before she came into the picture. We sat by the window of our favorite diner, the one where the waitresses still remembered how he liked his eggs. He smiled like always. He looked tired, but happy, and I hated that I had to take that smile from him. "Do you trust her?" I asked, gently, carefully. He blinked. "Of course I do." "Why?" I shook my head and took a sip of my coffee. "Just wondering." Because I couldn't say it yet, not without more, not without certainty. But the thread was already unraveling, and I knew it wouldn't stop now. I would keep pulling, quietly, relentlessly, until the truth fell into my hands, sharp and undeniable. And when it did, I would show him everything, because love is not about silence. And protecting my son no longer meant standing back. It meant stepping forward into the storm I had tried so long to ignore. I had always assumed I knew her story: marketing degree, small business owner, grew up in Oregon, moved to California for college, parents divorced, no siblings. It was a script she'd repeated 100 times, with the same rehearsed pauses and smiles. It all sounded so believable. too believable. So I went back to that thread, the warning, and followed a different path. I searched her maiden name, the one that appeared just once on the marriage certificate. Lillian Clark. Not the sleek, modern version she used now. The old one, the one she'd buried. It took digging, but I found an archived article from a small-town newspaper in Nevada, nearly a decade old. A name match, a blurry photo, a brief write-up about a local charity fundraiser where a young woman had been accused of embezzling several $1,000s, vanishing just days before charges could be filed. Her photo wasn't clear, but the eyes were hers. The article mentioned that she fled town, that no one had seen her since. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. It couldn't be a coincidence. Too much lined up. The name, the timing, the disappearance, and the way she never spoke of the past unless you asked. Even then, her answers were smooth, evasive. I printed it out and tucked it away with the photo from the envelope, each piece adding weight to the quiet truth I was building. I didn't know what scared me more, that it was all true, or that my son had been living beside a stranger for years without ever seeing her. I started noticing her lies more clearly now, tiny cracks in her stories. A relative she mentioned once but never again. A college roommate whose name changed from one year to the next. She talked about the past like it was a fog, and David, bless his trusting heart, never questioned it. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was building a case in my head, one she couldn't escape, and I was getting closer. One day soon, the whole truth would surface, and when it did, my son would finally see the woman he married for who she truly was. And this time, he wouldn't be smiling. I stopped pretending. Not with myself, not with her, not even with David. I didn't accuse, not yet, but I let the smile drop from my face when she walked into a room. I stopped softening my tone when we spoke. I let her see that something had shifted, and she noticed. "Oh, is everything all right?" she asked one evening, feigning concern as she set the table for dinner. "You seem a little distant lately." I looked at her, truly looked. Her eyes held the same glossy shine they always did, but behind them? Something flickered. Caution, maybe, or calculation. "I'm fine," I said too calmly. "Just thinking a lot lately." She smiled, a bit too tight, a bit too forced. That night, when David stepped out for a phone call, she turned to me across the kitchen island and said, "You know, I hope you're not holding anything against me. I really do care about him." It was the first time she said it like that, out loud, almost like a warning. I just nodded and reached for my tea. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of fear, because while she was busy with her smiles and shadows, I was busy too. I had contacted the newspaper where that old embezzlement story ran. The editor didn't have much, but he sent me an archived police notice, her name listed as a person of interest, though no official charges were ever filed. The case had gone cold when she vanished. She had walked away, free and untouched, until now. I kept everything in a manila folder, tucked behind books on my shelf. The envelope with the photo, the printout of the article, the police bulletin, a map of the town she once lived in. I was building a story, her story, and I knew something else. She hadn't done this alone. Someone had helped her disappear. Someone had taught her how to stay hidden. You don't get that good at lying without practice. But this wasn't just about her past anymore. This was about David's future. He wanted a child with her, a home, a life, and she would drag all of that into the fire if I let her. But I wouldn't, because now I had the truth, and soon so would he. The folder burned in my hands, not literally, of course, but every time I touched it, opened it, added another piece, I felt the heat of it rising in my chest. It wasn't just paper, it was truth, sharp, undeniable truth. And with each day that passed, it grew heavier. David had no idea. He came by that Sunday with flowers, the way he always did when he wanted to make me smile. "For your garden," he said, setting a bright bouquet on my porch. I watched him move around my kitchen like he used to when he was a boy, comfortable, full of quiet kindness, trusting. That trust was about to break, and I would be the one to do it. "Mom," he said between bites of pie, "I think she wants to try for a baby." I froze. He didn't notice. He was smiling, lost in thought, already imagining cribs and paint colors. "She's been different lately," he added. "More affectionate. I think she's finally ready." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the folder and spill it out across the table. "Look, David, look at what I know. Look at who she really is." But I didn't. Not yet. Because once I opened that door, there was no going back. I would be the mother who destroyed his marriage, the one who pulled the rug from beneath his life. And what if he didn't believe me? That was the part that haunted me most. He loved her. He believed in her. And people don't let go of love easily, not even when it's poisoned. Especially not when it's wrapped in the promise of a child, so I said nothing. Again. But I watched him leave with a knot in my stomach, knowing that if I waited too long, the damage would be permanent. There was still time, but not much. She was moving fast, preparing something. I could feel it. She was smart, careful. She could sense the ground shifting beneath her heels, and I was done pretending I didn't see the cracks. This silence I carried. It wouldn't protect him forever. Soon, the truth would have to come out, and when it did, I just prayed my son would still look at me the same way. I stood in front of the mirror that morning, staring at my reflection longer than usual. I looked tired. Not just from age, but from carrying too much for too long. The secrets I held, the truths I had gathered, they were no longer just quiet facts in a folder. They were alive, breathing, pressing against the walls of my life, demanding to be released. I had spent weeks collecting, waiting, watching. I told myself I needed more proof. I told myself I needed the perfect moment. But maybe what I really feared was the aftermath. What comes after the truth? That afternoon, I drove to her office. I'd never been there before. David had offered to show me once, but I declined. I didn't want to pretend I supported her ambitions. But now, I needed to see where she lived her other life, the one David knew nothing about. It was a modern space downtown, full of glass walls and abstract art. She stood near the front desk, laughing with someone on the phone. She didn't see me. I stayed in the hallway, behind a pillar, watching. The woman my son loved looked so confident, so in control. But even then, I saw it, the flicker of something beneath the surface. When she hung up, her face dropped for half a second. A crease formed between her brows, and then, like a switch, she turned the smile back on. She was hiding something, always. Back at home, I spread the contents of the folder across my dining table. The photo, the blog comment, the article, the police notice. I arranged them like puzzle pieces, then stood above them, trying to breathe. This wasn't a theory anymore. It wasn't paranoia. It was a pattern, a life built on escape and reinvention, and now she had her sights set on a child with my son. That night, I sat on my porch, holding the folder to my chest. The stars were out, the air was still, and I made my decision. I would tell David everything. Not next week, not after more digging. Tomorrow. Because the longer I waited, the deeper she would pull him in. And if I truly loved him, I had to be the one to break his heart before she did. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the sky shift from black to gray, listening to the slow rhythm of my old clock ticking through the darkness. My hands kept drifting to the folder beside me on the couch. I had rehearsed what I would say 100 times, and each time, I changed it. How do you tell your son that the woman he loves has built her life on lies? By morning, I had made coffee I didn't drink. The cup sat untouched while I paced the kitchen, watching the sun rise across the floorboards. David had agreed to come by. I told him I had something important to talk about. He didn't ask questions. He never did with me. That was part of our bond. Trust, unspoken understanding. I feared I was about to destroy it. When he walked through the door, he looked as he always did. Warm, open, ready to help. "What's going on, Mom?" he asked, stepping inside with a bag of groceries like he always did on Sundays. You okay? I didn't answer at first. I just looked at him. My son. The little boy who once climbed trees in the yard and broke his arm falling out of one. The teenager who cried when he lost his first dog. The man who smiled like a boy when he fell in love. I reached for the folder. I need you to sit down, I said softly. And I need you to listen to everything I say, all the way to the end. His smile faded, just slightly. What's going on? I'm going to show you something I didn't want to believe myself at first, but now I know I have to. Because if I don't, you might spend your whole life loving someone who never truly existed. He sat down, quiet, watching me, and I opened the folder. I handed him the photo first, the one from the envelope, then the article, then the police notice, one by one. He didn't speak, just stared. I could see his world shifting behind his eyes, even as he tried to hold it still. When I finished, I said nothing. I let the silence do what words never could, and then, finally, he looked at me and whispered, Mom, what is this? He held the paper in his hands like it might vanish if he blinked too hard. His fingers trembled slightly as he traced the edge of the photo, his eyes scanning the faces again and again, trying to make sense of what couldn't be undone. This isn't her, he said finally, but his voice was too soft to believe. This could be anyone. I nodded. I wanted to believe that too, until I found the article. The name, the town, the timing, it all fits. He shook his head, slower this time, as if trying to slow down the reality rushing toward him. But this was years ago. Even if this was her, people change, right? She could have made a mistake. She could have... People do change, I interrupted gently. But not when they hide their past. Not when they lie about it, bury it, and build something new on top of it like it never happened. He didn't look at me. He just kept staring at the photo, then at the police report. You went behind her back, he whispered. You investigated her? Yes, I said without apology, because I love you, and because something never sat right with me. I didn't want to find anything, David. I wanted to be wrong. The silence stretched between us like a fault line. She's not like that anymore, he said, though there was no conviction left in his voice. She's been good to me. She's been careful, I replied. That's different. He closed the folder slowly, almost tenderly, as if it contained a life he wasn't ready to let go of. His face was pale. I knew he wanted to defend her. I knew he loved her. But love doesn't erase the truth. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. I want you to ask her, I said. Not accuse, not yell. Just ask. Ask about Nevada. Ask who she used to be, and listen to how she answers. He looked up at me, eyes darker than I'd seen them in years. And if she lies, I didn't flinch. Then you'll know everything you need to know. The next day passed slowly. I didn't hear from David, and I didn't expect to. I knew he needed time to sit with the weight of it, to decide whether the truth was something he could face or something he'd choose to bury again. I'd given him all the tools. The rest was no longer mine to carry, but every hour that passed felt like I was holding my breath. That evening, I stood at the sink, rinsing out teacups I hadn't touched. The sky outside had turned a soft gold, and the stillness in the house felt louder than usual. Then my phone rang. It was David. I picked up slowly. Hi, sweetheart. A pause, then his voice, low, quiet. She lied. That was all he said, but it was enough. My grip tightened on the edge of the counter. What did she say? I asked her directly, he continued, his voice steady but thin. I asked if she had ever lived in Nevada. She laughed first, like I'd told a joke. Then she said no, said she'd never even been there. Not once. He stopped, and I waited. I knew there was more. So I showed her the article, he added, almost reluctantly. She changed, her whole face. She went quiet, and then she said I had misunderstood everything, that it was a different person with the same name, that it wasn't fair to judge her for something that wasn't even hers. "And do you believe her?" I asked softly. Another pause. Then, "No, I don't." A deep, aching silence settled between us. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sorrow. Because this wasn't about being right. It was about watching my son's world collapse and knowing I had been the one to light the match. "I don't know what to do," he said finally. "You do," I whispered. "You just don't want to." He exhaled. "She's gone to stay with a friend tonight, said she needed space." "That's good," I said. "You need space too." I wanted to hold him. I wanted to pull him into my arms and promise him that everything would be okay. But he wasn't a child anymore. He had to walk through this himself. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said, and just like that, the line went silent. The phone call stayed with me all night. Even after I turned out the lights, even after the house fell into that deep, familiar stillness, I could still hear his voice. Hollow, wounded, different. It wasn't the voice of a man who had simply been lied to. It was the voice of someone who had started to question everything. I knew that feeling well. It happens quietly at first, just a splinter in the mind, a whisper that something isn't right. But once it begins, there's no going back. Once you see the cracks, you can't unsee them. David had crossed that line now, and whether he wanted to or not, he would have to follow it to the end. I woke before dawn and sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded, waiting for daylight. I didn't feel relief, only a cold sort of calm. This wasn't a victory. It was the beginning of something heavier. He texted me mid-morning. "She's coming back this evening, says she wants to talk." I stared at the words for a long time, then I replied, "Don't let her talk over you. Let her explain, but listen closely. Not to what she says, to what she avoids." He didn't respond. I spent the day pacing from room to room, trying to distract myself with cleaning, cooking, gardening, anything to keep from imagining what their conversation would look like. Would she beg? Deny? Would she cry and promise to change? Would he fall for it? And then, sometime after 8 p.m., the call came again. "She confessed," he said, voice like gravel. I sat down. She said it was a mistake, that she was desperate back then, that she ran because she was afraid of prison. She said she thought if she changed her name, moved away, started over, she could leave it behind. I said nothing. Let him speak. "She cried," he added, "a lot, but it didn't feel real. I couldn't stop thinking about all the years she looked me in the eyes and never said a word." "And now?" I asked. "I asked her to leave," he said quietly. "I don't know if it's permanent. I don't know anything right now. I just need to breathe." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I'm here, David. Whenever you're ready." "I know," he whispered. And for the first time in days, he sounded like my son again. The days that followed were quiet, not in the peaceful way, but in that tense, suspended way, like the moment after a glass falls, but before it hits the floor. You know the sound is coming, but you don't know how loud it will be, or how much will break. David didn't come over, he didn't call, and I didn't press him. I had done what I came to do. The truth had been uncovered. The mask she wore had finally cracked. But still, I didn't feel triumph. I felt loss. Because no matter how wrong she was, no matter what she had hidden, she was still the woman my son had chosen. He had imagined a life with her, a family. And now all of that lay in pieces at his feet. I spent most of my time in the garden, pulling weeds, planting fall bulbs, trimming the faded roses. I found comfort in the earth. It didn't lie, didn't pretend. It showed you what lived, what died, and what could grow again. On the 4th evening, I saw David's car pull into the driveway. He stepped out slowly, hands in his pockets, shoulders drawn in. He looked older, not aged exactly, just worn, like someone who had walked too far under a heavy sky. I didn't know where else to go, he said. You're home, I replied. We sat on the back porch without speaking for a long time. The sun dipped low, the light turned amber. She packed a bag, he said eventually. She didn't fight me, didn't even raise her voice, just stared at me for a long time, and left. I waited. I loved her, he continued. Even after what I knew, even after she admitted it, I still loved her. Isn't that pathetic? No, I said. It's human. He looked out across the yard. I don't know how I missed it all. I thought I knew her. You saw what she wanted you to see, I said. We all did. But eventually, the truth always finds its way through. He didn't answer. He just reached over and took my hand. Quietly. Like he used to when he was small and didn't want to speak but needed me near. And I realized then, he wasn't broken. He was beginning again. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. It wasn't the kind of peaceful rest that erases pain, but the kind that follows exhaustion. A deep, dreamless sleep that leaves you heavy when you wake, but lighter than before. When I came into the kitchen, David was already there, making coffee like he used to before life got complicated. The soft clatter of the spoon against the mug, the hum of the kettle, it all felt strangely familiar, as if time had bent itself backward for just one morning. Didn't want to wake you, he said, offering me a tired smile. You're always welcome here, I replied. You don't need to knock. You never did. He handed me a cup, and we sat at the table in silence, the way people do when words aren't needed just yet. Outside, the sky was pale with the promise of rain. The house creaked gently with the weight of memory. She called last night, he said after a while, said she didn't want anything from me, no money, no second chance, just closure. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He continued. She said she was sorry, not for what she did, but for not telling me sooner. Said she thought if she could be someone new with me, it would erase everything that came before. She wasn't wrong about wanting to start over, I said quietly. But real love doesn't need to erase. It needs truth, even the hard parts. He nodded. I told her I hope she finds peace, but that I can't give it to her. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. There was no celebration in the air, no clean victory, only the slow unfurling of clarity, and sometimes that has to be enough. She said one more thing, he added, voice softer now. She thanked me. Said that, for a while, with me, she really believed she could be good. We sat in silence after that. There were no more folders to hold, no more questions to ask. The story had played out. The truth had settled. And in the quiet that followed, I finally exhaled. For both of us. I used to believe that truth was the most important thing, that once it came into the light, everything would fall into place. The pain would ease. The confusion would end. But now I know better. Truth is heavy. It doesn't always heal. Sometimes it only exposes what's already broken. David stayed in the guest room for a few nights. He said it was temporary, just until he figured out his next steps. I didn't ask questions. I didn't hover. I gave him space, but I watched from a distance. I saw the moments when his shoulders slumped a little deeper, when his laughter never quite reached his eyes. He wasn't angry with me, but there was a quiet between us that hadn't been there before. Not cold, not resentful, just different, like something had shifted permanently, and we both knew it. One evening, he came into the living room while I was folding laundry and said, "I don't blame you, Mom." I looked up. I wasn't sure. He sat down beside me and took a long breath. "You did what you thought was right. And maybe it was, but I need you to know, it still hurts." "I know," I said. He looked at the folded towel in my hands. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found out, if we'd had the baby, if I'd kept living the life I thought was real." "And would you have been happy?" I asked. He didn't answer because he knew. Happiness built on lies isn't happiness. It's a performance, and eventually the curtain falls. "You saved me," he said finally, "but it doesn't feel like saving yet." I nodded. "It will, one day, maybe not soon, but truth has a way of settling in. Like soil after a storm, it takes time before anything can grow again." That night, I sat alone on the porch and let myself feel everything I had buried, the fear, the guilt, the sorrow. I had done what I had to do, but even the right thing can leave scars. A week passed, then another. David moved back into his apartment, though it felt more like he was moving into someone else's life. The home he once shared with her now felt hollow, like a stage stripped of its props. He kept things neat, clean, empty. He came by on Sundays, just like he used to, but everything was quieter now. We didn't talk much about her. There was nothing left to say. She hadn't contacted him again. No letters, no calls, no final message. Just silence, the kind that echoes long after a door has closed. Sometimes I wondered where she went, what name she'd take next, what story she'd tell. But I didn't linger on it long. She was no longer ours to worry about. One morning, while I was weeding the garden, David pulled into the driveway unannounced. He stepped out with a box in his hands, taped at the corners, the cardboard worn from use. "What's that?" I asked, brushing soil from my gloves. He set it down gently on the porch. "Everything of hers I found, photos, letters, journals. I don't want to throw it away, but I can't keep it either." I nodded. "Leave it here. I'll take care of it." He hesitated, then said, "Do you think she ever loved me?" The question settled between us like a gust of wind, unexpected, too honest. "I think," I said slowly, "she wanted to, in the only way she knew how. But people who build their lives on lies don't leave much room for real love." He looked down, nodded once, and didn't speak again. Later, after he left, I opened the box. Inside were pieces of a life carefully constructed, a photo of them in Napa, a postcard with her handwriting, a book with her notes in the margins. They were all small echoes of a version of her that had never truly existed. I didn't burn them. I didn't throw them away. I sealed the box again and placed it in the attic, not to forget, but to keep it out of sight. Some truths belong to the past once they've served their purpose, because now we had to focus on what remained, on what was real, on what could begin again. It wasn't a grand moment. No sudden shift, no cinematic breakthrough, just a quiet morning. David showed up with bagels and coffee, like he used to when he was in college and couldn't cook. He didn't say much when he walked in, just placed the food on the counter, poured the coffee, and gestured for me to sit. I didn't ask why he came. I didn't need to. We sat together at the table, eating in silence, but the silence didn't feel heavy this time. It felt settled, as if something between us had repaired itself. Not perfectly, not all the way, but enough. After a while, he spoke. "I started running again." I smiled. "That's good. You always said it helped you think." He nodded. "I've been thinking a lot." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. I knew he wasn't ready to speak everything aloud. Some thoughts need time to grow into words. Instead, I asked, "And how's work?" He shrugged. "Busy, but I like it. It's the one thing that still makes sense." We kept talking about normal things, small things, but beneath every word, I heard what he didn't say, that the fog was lifting, that the pain was becoming manageable, that he was beginning to return to himself. Before he left, he hugged me. He didn't do it quickly or out of habit. He just stood there for a moment, holding on a little longer than usual, and in that embrace, I felt it. Forgiveness, not for what happened, but for what I had to do. "I don't know what comes next," he said, pulling back, "but I know I don't want to be angry anymore." "That's more than enough," I said. After he drove away, I stood by the window, watching the driveway empty again. But this time, I didn't feel the weight of his absence. I felt something else, something unfamiliar, but welcome. Hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. And sometimes, that's all you need. I looked at myself in the mirror that evening and saw someone different. Not younger, not softer, but clearer, sharper around the edges. The woman staring back at me had made a choice, a hard one, and she had lived through the weight of it. There were lines around my eyes I hadn't noticed before, not from age but from worry, from silence, from watching the ones I love walk too close to ruin and knowing I had no choice but to pull them back, even if it hurt. I didn't regret what I did, but I finally allowed myself to admit that it changed me. I had spent so many years as the quiet support, the mother in the background, always offering comfort, never interference, and for the most part, that was enough, until it wasn't. Because love, real love, isn't always quiet. Sometimes it speaks hard truths. Sometimes it breaks the surface. That week, David invited me to lunch. His idea. A little cafe downtown, the kind with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. We sat outside under a striped umbrella, sipping iced tea and sharing a plate of lemon pie. He talked more than usual. Not about her, but about himself. About plans he'd once shelved. About maybe taking a trip. About considering a transfer at work, just for a change of pace. For the first time in months, his words felt light. Not weightless, but lighter. "I thought I'd feel more broken," he said suddenly. "You're not broken," I replied. "You were betrayed. That's different." He nodded slowly. "You know what's strange? I don't even miss her." "That's not strange," I said. "That's clarity." He smiled, a real one, and I smiled back. That night, at home, I stood again in front of the mirror. This time, I didn't study the woman staring back. I simply nodded to her, a quiet acknowledgement, a thank you, for surviving the storm, for speaking the truth, for loving enough to lose and strong enough to begin again. The house felt different now. David came by more often, not because he needed somewhere to hide, but because he was finding his way back to something steady, something real. Sometimes he'd bring groceries, sometimes just stories from his day. He never stayed long, but the visits meant more than he knew. He was healing, and so was I. There was no talk of dating, no mention of her name. She had vanished as quietly as she arrived, and we allowed her absence to become permanent. There was no ritual goodbye, no final confrontation, just a closed chapter, sealed by truth and silence. One Sunday afternoon, David helped me move some old boxes from the attic. We laughed over dusty photo albums and broken ornaments I couldn't bring myself to throw away. At one point, he opened a box he didn't recognize. It was the one, her box. He froze for a second, then gently closed the lid. "You can toss that," he said. "You sure?" He nodded. "I don't need it anymore." I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. That box had once been a symbol of betrayal, of confusion and pain. Now it was just cardboard, just weight he didn't want to carry. Later that day, we planted tulips along the side of the garden. They wouldn't bloom for months, but we worked the soil together anyway, our hands covered in earth. The breeze was soft, and the sky above us was open, wide. "You think things really happen for a reason?" David asked suddenly, wiping his brow. "I think," I said, "sometimes life removes what's false before it gives you what's true." He considered that, then smiled. "Guess I've got space now." He didn't mean just in the garden. He meant in his life. And I knew then that he wasn't lost anymore. He was rearranged, different but whole, bruised but standing, and stronger for it. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I saw her, walking her dog past my front yard, the same way she did every weekend. She'd lived 2 houses down for years, but I never knew much about her. Her name was Elise, early 30s, kind face, a calm way about her. David was helping me repair the porch railing that day. He noticed her before I did, noticed the way she smiled as she passed, the small wave, the pause in her step. "You know her?" he asked casually. "Not well," I said, watching her disappear around the corner. "But she's sweet. Helps her mother with errands. Works from home, I think." He nodded, brushing dust from his hands. "She seems nice." And then, nothing more. But I saw it, the first flicker of something that didn't belong to the past. That evening, over dinner, I teased him. "You know, Elise always asks about you when I see her." He raised an eyebrow. "She does?" I smiled. "Once or twice." He didn't press the topic, but I caught the shift. A slight straightening of his shoulders, a glance toward the window as if he might see her again. And that was enough. Not because I wanted him to move on, but because he could. Grief often closes doors, locks them, bolts them. But healing opens windows. Later that night, I sat by the window with a book I didn't read, sipping tea that had gone cold. Outside, the world moved slowly. Cars passed, lights flickered, branches swayed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace not just as a pause, but as a presence. Not everything had been fixed, not every scar had faded, but the air was lighter, the path was clear. There was a softness returning to the spaces that had felt so hard for so long, and somewhere inside me, I knew. What we lost made room for what we were finally ready to find. The next time Elise walked by, David was already on the porch. He stood with his arms crossed, a cup of coffee in hand, pretending not to notice her. But I saw the glance he gave, the way his posture changed slightly when she approached. "Morning," she called out. "Morning," he replied, smiling. That was it. Nothing more, no grand gestures, no awkward conversations, just a shared look, a pause in time. But I knew. That's how healing begins, not in declarations, but in small, repeated moments of ease. And David, though still cautious, was learning how to step into them again. Later, I caught him in the kitchen, staring out the window. He didn't say her name, but I saw it in his eyes. "Why don't you say hello next time?" I offered, gently. He shrugged. "I might, just not sure I'm ready." I understood. There's a certain fear in letting someone new see the parts of you that have been fractured, but there's courage, too, in trying again. That evening, we took a walk through the neighborhood, something we hadn't done since he was in high school. The streets were quiet, the breeze warm. We didn't talk about her. We talked about work, about the changing leaves, about how strange it was that fall had come so quickly this year. And when we passed Elise's house, David glanced at the porch. Empty. But he looked anyway. He was beginning to look forward. And for a mother, that's all I could ever want. Back at home, I pulled a blanket over my lap and turned on the radio. An old song played, something soft, slow, familiar. I let it wash over me, not with sadness, but with memory. Life hadn't returned to how it was. It never could. But it had reshaped itself into something honest, something simpler, and sometimes soft beginnings are the bravest kind. It happened on a Thursday. I was pruning the hydrangeas when I saw David walking down the street, hands tucked in his jacket pockets. There was something different in his pace. Steady, sure, like he had made up his mind about something and wasn't about to second-guess it. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did, and chose not to wave. Either way, I stood still, barely breathing, as I watched him turn left, toward Elise's house. He climbed the porch steps, paused at the door, and knocked. Just once. A soft knock, barely louder than the breeze. She answered. I couldn't hear what they said. I didn't need to. Their conversation was brief, but it ended with a smile. A real one. The kind that doesn't try too hard. The kind that belongs to two people who've both been through something and still believe there's more ahead. He didn't stay long, just enough time for a moment to begin. Later that evening, he called me. "Just wanted to say thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not pushing. For letting me fall apart and still being there when I put myself back together." My throat tightened. That's what mothers do. "Not all of them," he replied. "But you did?" We didn't speak long, but it was one of those conversations you hold close, the kind that settles into your chest like warmth after rain. After we hung up, I walked out to the garden. The stars were just beginning to show. The earth still held the scent of leaves and soil, and somewhere in the distance, wind chimes played a gentle tune. I stood beneath the night sky, arms folded, breathing in the quiet. There was still more to come. I knew that. More choices, more healing, more pieces to pick up and turn over. But that night, I allowed myself a rare thing, a deep, full breath, because my son was okay. And for the first time in a very long time, so was I. I woke up that morning without the weight. It was subtle, like the way sunlight creeps in under the curtains before you realize it's morning. For the first time in months, my body didn't feel braced for something. Not a phone call, not a confrontation, not a memory, just stillness and peace. I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair, and realized how long it had been since I looked at myself without judgment. The lines near my mouth, the silver threading through my hair, they didn't feel harsh anymore. They felt earned. I had spent so many years pouring into others, into David, into my husband before he passed, into holding things together for everyone else. I didn't regret that, but somewhere along the way, I'd misplaced something. Myself. I took a walk to the bookstore downtown. I hadn't been in months, maybe years. I browsed the aisles slowly, running my fingers over titles I used to love, cookbooks, mystery novels, travel guides I never had the courage to follow. I bought 3 books that day, just because they made me smile. When I returned home, I sat on the porch with tea and started the first chapter. No interruptions, no heaviness in my chest. Just a story. And me. That evening, David came by with a pie. Store-bought, slightly crooked, a bit too sweet. He didn't need to say why he brought it. We sat together on the porch as the sky turned to dusk, our conversation light and lazy. He told me Elise had invited him to a small community event next week. Nothing serious, he said, but it feels good to be invited. I squeezed his hand. It feels even better to say yes. He smiled and looked out toward the trees. You ever think about traveling again? Maybe, I said, or maybe I'll just start with painting again. I found my old brushes in the attic. There it was, that quiet flicker of becoming. We had both gone through the fire, but neither of us stayed there. We chose to walk forward, not with bitterness, not with fear, but with something simpler. Hope. The seasons were shifting again. Summer had left quietly, and autumn settled in with a golden hush. The air was crisp now, the kind that made you breathe a little deeper. My garden had begun its slow retreat, leaves curling, petals fading, roots holding strong beneath the soil. There was something comforting in that. David stopped by on a Thursday. No pie this time, just a jacket slung over his shoulder and a lightness in his step. He stayed for dinner, told me about a book Elise had recommended, a trail they wanted to hike together this weekend, a new project he'd been given at work. I listened. Not as someone waiting for signs of relapse or regret, but simply as a mother. Present, proud, peaceful. When he left, I stood in the doorway for a while, watching his taillights disappear down the street. I didn't feel worry. I didn't feel fear. I felt stillness. That night, I sat with a blank canvas. The old paintbrushes still worked, a little stiff, a little worn, but they remembered how to move. I dipped into soft blues and deep earth tones, letting color become memory, memory become form. I didn't plan the painting, I just followed instinct. It came together slowly, a quiet sky, a path through trees, a figure in the distance, walking forward, not turning back. I smiled when I realized it was me. In the past, I might have looked at a painting like that and felt alone. But now I knew better. Solitude isn't emptiness, it's space. Space to breathe, to rediscover, to become. My son had found his space, and now, so had I. We had both lost something that once seemed permanent, but sometimes life removes the false to make room for the true. And what remained, in the quiet after the storm, was more solid than anything we'd had before. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real, and maybe that's all we ever needed. The envelope was simple, no flourish, no decoration, just cream-colored cardstock with David's handwriting across the front. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked under the stack of mail I almost forgot to check. I opened it slowly, not out of suspicion, but because something about it felt significant. Inside was a small card, just a date, a time, and a location. No explanation, no note. But I knew. I called him that evening. "Is this what I think it is?" He laughed quietly. "Just a small gathering. Elise and I thought it might be nice to have a few people over. Nothing formal, just people we care about." "People?" I asked, amused. "Well, mostly you," he said. "And maybe her mother, and maybe one or two others." It wasn't a wedding. It wasn't a party. It wasn't anything with labels or expectations. But it was something. A step. A way of saying life continues. Gently. Honestly. "I'd love to come," I said. The rest of the week passed in a blur. I found a blouse I hadn't worn in years, steamed it carefully, polished the shoes I nearly gave away last spring. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to feel like myself again. The day of the gathering was cool, soft sunlight streaming through the trees. David and Elise welcomed me at the front door, both glowing in the unspoken way people do when they've survived something hard and still choose love. We ate. We talked. We laughed. There was no mention of the past. No long speeches, just warmth, just presence. At one point, Elise leaned over and said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For him," she smiled. "He's kind because someone raised him that way." My eyes welled just for a second. That night, I walked home beneath a sky full of stars. There was no grand conclusion, no fireworks, no finish line. But I felt it. Something had begun. A few days after the gathering, Elise called. It surprised me. We had spoken politely before, shared casual remarks across dinner tables and porches, but this was different. Intentional. She asked if I wanted to join her for coffee. "Just us," she said. "If that's all right?" I said yes. We met at a small cafe tucked between a flower shop and a bookstore. The kind of place that served coffee in mismatched mugs and offered extra whipped cream without being asked. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window with 2 steaming cups and that familiar calm in her posture. "I wasn't sure if this would be too much," she said as I sat. "But I wanted to talk to you. As me. Not as David's girlfriend, not as a replacement." I appreciated that. Her honesty, her awareness. "You're not replacing anyone," I said. "There's no one to replace." We sipped our coffee in quiet for a moment before she spoke again. "He told me everything. About what happened. About her. About you." I nodded, bracing. "He said you saved him," she continued. "But I think it was more than that. You didn't just protect him, you reminded him who he is." I didn't know what to say, so I listened. "I've never had a mother-in-law," she added quickly. "And I know I'm not that to you, but if it's not too strange, I'd really like to know you." I looked at her. Really looked. She was not loud, not dramatic, not a distraction from the past. She was quiet strength, gentle steadiness. The kind of person who wouldn't run. "I'd like that too," I said. We stayed for an hour, maybe 2. We talked about books, music, holidays we both hated, meals we loved. It wasn't about bonding. It was about showing up. 2 women with open hands and no pretenses. When I walked home later, I thought about how rare it is to begin again without expectation. Just space, just possibility. Elise didn't try to win me over, and because of that, she did. The brushes sat on the table, clean and ready. The canvas waited by the window, where the morning light was softest. I hadn't touched them in weeks, not out of fear, just hesitation. After years of pouring into others, doing something purely for myself still felt indulgent, unfamiliar. But today, I sat down. I dipped into a shade of green, bold, rich, alive, and let it stretch across the canvas. I didn't know what I was painting. I didn't care. It wasn't about the image. It was about the act, the motion of reclaiming something that was mine. Later, I made a pot of soup from scratch. Not because someone was coming over, not because I had to, but because I wanted to fill the house with warmth. Because I could. That evening, David called just to say hi. No urgency in his voice, just the sound of someone settling into a rhythm again. "We're thinking about getting a dog," he said, chuckling. "A little one. Nothing too wild." "You were always the one begging for a puppy when you were 5, I reminded him. "Looks like you're finally getting your wish." He paused. "You know, things feel good right now." I smiled. They sound good. After we hung up, I didn't clean the brushes. I left them out, ready for tomorrow. Then, for no particular reason, I opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase. It was dusty, unused since the last family trip years ago. I placed it on the bed, unzipped it, and just looked. Not because I had plans, but because for the first time I allowed myself to imagine them. A short trip, perhaps, somewhere quiet, coastal, a weekend with a book and nothing else. Not to escape, not to start over, just to be. Sometimes healing doesn't look like a moment of triumph. Sometimes it's just paint on your fingers, soup on the stove, a suitcase left open. Room for what comes next. Not for them, not even for him, but for me. The ticket was one way. Not in the permanent sense, just a symbolic one. A quiet promise to myself. I didn't need every detail planned. I didn't need a perfect itinerary or a reason to go. I just needed motion, change, air. I chose a small coastal town I'd only read about once, tucked between cliffs and waves, known for its bookstores and tea shops. Nothing dramatic, just gentle. And for the first time in years, I booked a room with a view for one. When I told David, he lit up. "You're going alone?" he asked. I nodded. "Good," he said. "That's the bravest thing I've heard all week." I left on a Friday morning, suitcase packed with books, scarves, a new journal, and no expectations. The train hummed softly as it wound along the water, and I watched the landscape change with the quiet awe of someone seeing the world again, not for the first time, but with new eyes. The town was even lovelier than I imagined. Slow. Kind. The people greeted you like they'd been waiting, but never in a hurry. I spent the first day walking with no destination, letting my feet decide. I bought a used book of poems with someone else's notes in the margins. I sat on a bench by the water and read out loud, to no one in particular. And I laughed. Out loud. Not at a joke, but just because it felt good. That night, back in my room, I opened the window and let the sea air in. I poured a glass of wine. I looked around. At the small lamp, the quilted bed, the sound of waves beyond the glass. There was no one to tell, no one to entertain, just me. And it was enough. I didn't think about what had happened. I didn't replay old conversations or revisit old pain. I didn't mourn or relive. I simply lived. And in that quiet, I found something I didn't know I'd been missing. Joy. Not loud, not overwhelming, just soft, steady, and mine. The train pulled into the station just past noon. The sky was soft gray, with streaks of gold pressing through the clouds. I stepped off slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wasn't ready for it to end. The quiet, the freedom, the space I'd found in that little town. I carried it with me. Tucked somewhere beneath my coat, behind my ribs, David was waiting at the curb. He didn't wave or rush, just stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, a gentle smile on his face. "You look different," he said, opening the trunk. "I feel different." We didn't say much on the drive home, but it wasn't the kind of silence that needed to be filled. It was comfortable now, like music turned low. I watched the streets pass, the familiar turns and sidewalks. Everything looked the same, but I saw it differently. When we pulled up to my house, I paused before getting out. "It's good to be home," I said. "It's good to have you home." Inside, everything was just as I left it. Tidy, quiet, still, but I walked through each room like it was new. I opened the curtains wider, let the light in, ran my hand across the old kitchen table and smiled. I unpacked slowly. The scarf I never wore, the book of poems, a shell I picked up on the beach, all of it found a place not just in drawers, but in me. Later that night, I sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl, tea in hand. The sky above was wide and dark, scattered with stars. I thought of all the things I didn't know about the future, and for once, I wasn't afraid of that. The woman who left this house a week ago would have tried to plan what came next, would have tried to fill every space, but not this version of me. Now I let the space exist, because some parts of life don't need to be solved, only lived, and I was ready, not to return to who I was, but to continue becoming who I had quietly, patiently, always been. The days moved gently after I returned, not fast, not slow, just right. I planted new herbs by the kitchen window, signed up for a painting class at the community center, started walking every morning, even when it rained. My world hadn't grown bigger, but it had grown deeper. One morning, I ran into Elise at the market. We chatted by the pairs for 15 minutes, laughing about nothing, sharing recipes, talking about the local art fair. It felt like we'd known each other longer than we had. That's what happens when two people meet beyond pretense. Later that week, David brought over the dog, a tiny, scruffy thing with eyes too big for its body and the energy of a tornado. They named him Benny. Short for benediction, David joked, because he's a blessing I didn't expect. I watched him chase Benny through the yard, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years, a sound so full, so free. I didn't say it aloud, but in that moment, I thanked the version of myself who chose to speak the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That choice changed everything, not instantly, not without pain, but it made space for this. A garden full of life, a kitchen filled with laughter, a porch light that stayed on not out of habit, but out of welcome. I didn't need a grand revelation. I didn't need the world to declare me brave. All I needed was this, to look around and feel whole, to know that I had walked through fire and come out with soft hands, that I had lost what wasn't meant for us and kept what mattered most, not just my son, but myself. The house was quiet when I woke, but it wasn't empty. The curtains moved gently in the early breeze. Light spilled through the windows in long, golden lines. I sat up slowly, breathing in the kind of morning that doesn't ask anything of you, just offers itself, without rush, without demand. I stood barefoot on the porch with my tea, the air crisp and clean. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Maybe Benny, maybe another. The world stretched itself awake. I had no plans for the day, and for the first time in a very long time, that felt like abundance. There was no folder of secrets waiting to be opened, no truth left unspoken, no weight tucked beneath my ribs. I had done the hard thing, not just for David, but for myself. I had told the truth. I had let go. I had stayed. And now, I was living. Not because everything had worked out perfectly, not because life had finally become easy, but because I had chosen it again, day after day. I thought about painting, about baking, about walking to the cafe and ordering something sweet. I thought about calling a friend I hadn't seen in months. I thought about picking a new book, or none of those things at all. Freedom, I realized, doesn't always come in the form of escape. Sometimes it arrives in stillness, in choosing your day, in not needing to explain who you are anymore. Inside, the clock ticked softly. The flowers on the windowsill leaned toward the sun. The whole world, it seemed, had made peace with this moment, and so had I. I sipped my tea slowly, watching the sky widen. I didn't know what the next chapter of my life would hold, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to write it.